Hello and welcome to this Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools video series. I'm Nick Bertaski, the Associate Director, and I'm hosting today. And with me today is Class Act Charter School. And I have Travis and Paula with me. And I believe you two, and you can correct me, but I believe you two are originals of the school. But I am going to just really welcome you. Thanks for being here. On a Thursday afternoon to share a little bit with the charter world, the great things that are happening in your school district.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Nice to see you, Nick.
Yes, and I'm really excited to be with both of you. And the last few interviews we've had has been one person, so this is super fun to have a small group. But what I want to start with is your journey. Either a little bit of your personal journeys, and then sort of how does that dovetail with Class Act's journey as it has grown as a charter school in your district, and just to tell our audiences. I mean, we all have such unique stories, right, in our backgrounds as we get into this charter world, and I'd love you to share yours with the audience.
Well, I think one of the really cool things about Class Act is it originally started in the Glidden School District in 2007 with a dissemination grant. And in 2009, when Glidden School District and Park Falls School District consolidated and became Schwamigan School District, then Class Act about 2011 made a move down to the South Campus. So we actually have two buildings, a North Campus and a South building. But Class Act moved down to the South Campus, which is the location of the other high school. So then that made it much more convenient for students to take electives like shop and band and choir and things like that, because there's about a 20-minute drive between the two campuses. So, that's a good part of our story. And I think about 2008 or so, I just asked the question at a retirement party, what is a charter school? To the retiring superintendent, and that's when I started to get involved. But honestly, teaching high school English and college prep and AP English like I saw all the time that there were kids we were not meeting because traditional ways of teaching weren't working. And I was using some project-based learning before I knew what project-based learning was in my classroom, but I just could see that other kids really enjoyed that. So I was glad to come on board. And I think it was like 2011, 12, something like that. Mr. Keefe said he was firing me from my English teaching job. Not really, but he wanted me to move into the Class Act full time because it was holding up kids who really needed to get in there because we couldn't get as many kids. And then Travis came along too.
Fast forward to the halfway through the 15-16 school year. I was a fresh graduate of UW Stevens Point looking for my first placement. And of course, I'm cruising along on WeCan and came across this. And I kind of had the same question Paula had of, well, what is this? Because I had done some student teaching in the Marathon Venture Academy, which is a charter school, but it's a completely different charter. So I did a little digging around and finally decided, you know what, I want to live up north again because I graduated from Rhinelander and I applied and I've been here ever since. But I got to tell you, the biggest thing that for me, for at least the first 2 years, was wrapping my head around this place. We joke all the time that I spent the first 2 years unlearning everything I thought I knew about what it meant to be a teacher. And the experience has been amazing, and I would think it really has been something that not only am I grateful for, but I feel like has made a difference even outside of my professional life, because I look at things even in my personal life different because of this experience.
So I'm going to drill into one thing that you were saying. I'm just curious. This is just a discussion topic that we have across the state. How do you explain in your community who hadn't had a charter school before, how do you explain to someone new to it? It was probably explained to you in one way, but then how have you now explained it if someone's like, well, so what is this charter school? What does that mean? How are you explaining it to your community?
I tell you, our community still doesn't realize we have a charter school. So they still think there's only one high school, and it's getting better every year, but there definitely is still some gap because it's just something we don't know. The generation of people raising kids right now never had something like this. So when we explain it to them, we find the best way is to get them in our space, whether that's inside when we're working, on the campus, or whether it's outside and we're at Tracy Lake, which is our school forest, or maybe we're out somewhere else doing something. Then they really get to see what it is. So it's more of an immersion experience. I think that's the best way to do it. But if I'm just at a board meeting or something and someone says, well, what is this PBL thing? And I say things like, it's hands-on learning. And I use the bathroom as a good excuse or a good example. I'll say, when you want to fix your bathroom or you want to remodel your bathroom, where do you go to figure that out? And people usually say the internet, and I walk on YouTube and I look at these things. I said, well, now imagine working in the community like that. And I'll explain the grouse project or something we've done in the wetlands. And they'll be like, oh, that's really cool. And you're outside all the time? And I said, yeah, we're outside most of the time. And they're like, man, I wish I had a school like that when I went to school. It's usually the response. So I use hands-on, try to relate it to a project that we do in real life, because most of the time it's adults we're explaining this to more than kids. And they get that. They get, well, yeah, I don't just go in and start taking my bathroom apart. I got to do some research and practice, and it doesn't always go right and all of that. So that's how I do it, I guess. You might do something different.
I would agree largely with how you do it. I use different examples, obviously, but a lot of it is, like you said, getting people into our space and actually having them tag along for a day, because you get these moments of aha, and you can just see it in their eyes when you can get them out in the woods, that they're like, oh, now I get it. But I mean, in the same token, I'd also say that how I've described it has evolved, especially in the last 2 years, because 2 years ago, we were in this space 99% of the time, where now, if I remember correctly from the sheet I'm using to track it, I think we're out at Tracy Lake 75% of the time. It's really changed. So I would even say that the answer has evolved in the last 2 years.
That is true. I don't think it ever stays the same in charter school world. There's always something changing, evolving. And I think that's why I've loved it so much. I didn't see as much change in my first half of my 20 some years in education. There was change, but not the kind of change that goes on in here every day. No way.
Well, that's a great segue. And so I want to dig into this Tracy Lake, this opportunity to go outside, get kids outside your school walls. From my understanding, you had a pivot a little bit to get out there even more during COVID, just to be able to spread out during the early times rather than close, or rather than just send your kids home for remote learning. But it sounds like you're still doing it. And so obviously there's some great opportunity. And so could you just tell me a little bit about the pivot, and then sort of, what does it look like out there? And I might have more questions for you, but I'd love to just hear the original kind of idea and how it's playing out now.
Well, the principal put me on the re-entry plan committee, because, and I understand why he did that, because he knew re-entry for us might look different than re-entry for the Schwamigan High School kids. And one of the first things we were trying to tackle is how to schedule kids so we didn't have the whole high school student body in the building at the same time. Because that first year, we had the CHS, Schwamigan High School, had 2 days online live and 3 days in the building, and they rotated between a green and a gold. And so you were either on the green team or the gold team. And Class Act I said, we're going to be 4 days in person, because we knew our demographics were not going to be good for online at all. And I said, well, what if we just leave and we take our 20 or 30 kids and go to Tracy Lake or somewhere else for the day? Then you don't have them don't have to deal with them in the hallway. You don't have them in the cafeteria. And that would solve one whole group of kids, or drop those numbers by one whole group. And that really benefited the whole campus then. We didn't we thought, oh my gosh, or at least me, this was the thing. This is our moment. This is the moment we've been waiting for. Now nobody can tell us, no, we can't go to Tracy Lake because they need us to go somewhere. So it was just a perfect opportunity. And thank God I remembered it to stick it in at that moment.
Thank God indeed, because you and I had been talking for several years about, wouldn't it be nice if, and our original idea was just to spend September, October, and maybe part of November.
Yes, that's right.
And then even last year, the plan was to, we'll tough it out as long as we can, and then we'll have to adjust from there.
And then we got lucky again.
Winter was
and
nice
winter
to us.
was not really that bad. Now this winter, we've been having to be inside on campus far more than we did last year. And, it wasn't that pivot to Tracy Lake was one of the best things that happened to us, both as educators and for our students. They're totally removed from typical high school drama, and we were just out in the woods. Not a lot of technology works. We have a pavilion there that has a heated inside cement block classroom area, and then it has a regular picnic area, like if you were going to the county park or whatever. So we could use both areas, and we made that indoor classroom, work. And between having kids out for COVID or kids out just for something else, we never had too many kids per the stand, whatever the guidelines were that we needed to have. And most of the kids, I would say probably 98% of them said, I love it out here. I hope we never go back. And we've noticed that their behavior is not as good this year as it was last year. Granted, there's probably a lot of factors to that, but one of them is we're not out there as long. Our day is shorter. We're only out there 4 of the hours of the, about 4 hours. Yeah, about 4 hours and over lunch versus leaving at 8:15 and not coming back till 3:30. We liked it 8:15 to 3:30.
We really did, because it also gave us opportunities to do things that if we wanted to do the wetland tour right now, I don't know if we'd have the time. Last year, we started at the headwaters of Tracy Lake. Well, not really headwaters, but the north end of it, where there's a bog. And we followed the water through Tracy Lake, through a little creek down into a swamp, and all the way clear across the property just to study how water moved. We got to use nature as that third teacher.
Yeah.
And
we're talking about 320 acres of property. So it's a really beautiful.
It is. It gave us opportunities to work on creative writing and journaling and scientific observation. And
there was a lot more spontaneous.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we had 2 of our grouse murdered. We called it a CSI murder because they were murdered. They were just a pile of feathers. And when we came across it, because we were there all day, we could literally stop whatever else we had planned and investigate what in the world happened to those 2 birds.
And it turned into a week of, well, we need to read articles about how are we going to identify what happened to this thing.
Yeah.
And
what predator eats the bird and leaves nothing but a pile of feathers. Where's the rest of it? It was totally fun. I picked up a roadkill. I always like to do something surprising every once in a while.
Oh, that was hilarious.
And somebody just killed it because it wasn't even cold yet. And I picked it up, put it in a bucket and brought it. And we dissected
and then
we dissected it because we could see what it ate. Because that was going to lead us to where we were going to find the grouse on our property that we were trying to track.
Still one of my favorite pictures that we took last year is the student that's face to face with the scat as he was investigating, trying to figure out what ate that grouse.
Yeah, we did scat exercises and
laying in the snow, nose to maybe 6 inches from that scat, just picking at it with a stick. One of my favorite pictures.
Yeah, the things we do to engage our children, our learners, right? I mean, we'll go to all ends. It's Paula's pulling over her car on the highway.
Right. Well, and teachers too. I think we had the best co-teaching year we've had in 6-7 years we've been doing this, because we could absolutely be spontaneous. Mm-hmm. We were just as inquisitive as they were because we weren't looking at the time. Mm-hmm. The only thing we had to pay attention to was getting back on the road and back so they caught the buses at the end of the day.
And there may have been a day or two we were running to pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't matter if we ate lunch late or early because we were out in the woods. It didn't matter about any of those things. And I would say that that's the thing I've least liked about this year.
Mhm.
Now, the benefit was that our students could take 2 electives, up to 2 electives if they wanted to. And we're a small enough school that the counselor scheduled the typical ones our kids like to take for first and second hour and 6th, 7th. So that covered band and choir and those some of those tech ed classes. So our kids are getting that benefit
This year.
Yeah, I don't know what'll happen next year, but.
So that's the benefit or that is some of the reason why you're not out there 100% at a time.
Yeah.
You're giving your kids opportunities for electives and things. So tell me a little bit more about you're out there. We'll start with just how is learning happening? It sounds like it's very organic, but how are you making sure it's happening, tracking it, reporting it, or at least providing feedback to the students in the 4 core areas, right? As we're talking about, at least with the English language arts, kind of math, science, and social science. Just sort of curious how that happens, and even today, when you're still going out there for 4 of those hours in a school day, how does that look? I'm sure there's many viewers here that are going to say, well, I don't understand how you keep track. I need to tell the parents if they're learning. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, we do use HeadRush as a management system. And so the students have their own individual projects. One of the things we did have to pivot on too was fewer independent projects last year and move to more of a seminar based because of COVID. We couldn't have as much independent because, a kid could be out for a whole month. And we needed to have things that were a little bit more scheduled. So we did ensure that there were certain power standards met in all of those core areas. And we've kept that structure because it works so well. So I would say we still organize around big ideas, big project ideas. So for example, I keep coming back to our grouse project, but that's kind of our flagship project that we've had the longest. And it covers so many different things. For example, in social studies, we have students studying civics. We're trying to get a bill passed to make the rough grouse the state's small game bird. Well, there's a lot of civics involved in figuring out, well, how does this work? And then, of course, there's all the lessons about why it didn't get through the government because it didn't. And there's just so many different things like that, and a lot of community-based things. I would say we do a lot more social studies-based things that are regional, or somehow, if it's not a regional event, it's something that affects us in our little community here. Mm-hmm. When they started talking about vaccine stuff, we focused on, well, what's happening in Price County. Math, we always do with Alex. And now that we're on campus, we take advantage of that and we do math first thing in the morning while we're here. And we do have some internet out at Tracy Lake.
We do. It's definitely not as robust as here, which
we don't mind actually.
We don't mind it at all. In fact, there's days that it doesn't work and secretly we're going, yes.
Yes.
Darn, the internet's not working. I guess we'll have to go tromps through a swamp.
And honestly, we're just sometimes shocked at what they'll do. And this is what I would love listeners to know is we had 20 kids tromping through over 2 feet of snow this week on a day because we were trying to find one of our birds that's still alive.
We hope.
And basically we were trying to surround it so we could flush it and see where it really is and make sure it's actually alive. And so only Travis and I were on snowshoes. Everybody else didn't want snowshoes. I think now they would change their mind about that. But what fun we had, snow up to our knees and over it. And we actually went off the trails, even if the trails weren't, groomed or anything. But once you went off the trail, it was even deeper. And it's very hilly where we're at. There was a lot of laughing, a lot of goofing around. But gosh, there was an awful lot of learning too, because we had to use GPS coordinates to, hone in on where this was. And we didn't find it.
So we got to do it again.
So now they're like, well, when are we going back out there to see if we can find it?
Some of them are convinced it's dead.
Right. Some of them want to prove the other ones that it's alive. And so, and I look at that group and I go, you know, these are not all the kind of kids I would have thought would get excited about tropping through the snow and being soaking wet and really tired. Cause man, it was hard work, even on snowshoes.
Even with snowshoes. I was thinking I should have brought my big wooden ones. Maybe I would have had an easier time.
So that's why the learning is happening, because too, we can stop along the way and do something. You know, we were relearning how to use the compass. We were double checking how to use our equipment because we couldn't find this bird. So it gives us those opportunities to come back to core standards like using maps, using statistical data, PE.
Oh, good Lord, yes.
What's some other ones? Oh, English, we're working on some articles
Yep.
that have to do with that. We just got done doing a satire where they could pick something goofy, and it was a satire on climate change, really, that they read, and then they did something goofy along with it. These are reluctant learners, or they started that way. They're not anymore.
No,
for the most
they
part.
eat it up. And, you know, there's, we, as we're doing these things, you know, Paula mentioned the PE and everything that was involved with trying to find this bird. Sometimes our adventures or our misadventures turn into opportunity, inspiration.
Yeah.
Where someone goes, I want to know more about that. And I'm thinking about it, the young man that sits in the back corner that told me last semester after we had done some of our climate change work, and he's like, you got in my head.
Yeah.
He's got this huge independent project going right now, digging really deep down into, well, what is climate change? Not even looking at just is it man caused or nature caused? You know, he's literally asking himself, what is it? And he's digging down deep into it just because he got inspired.
And he'll tell you right out, I wasn't really a fan of running around in the woods.
Oh yeah.
He'll tell you right out. And here he is running around in the woods.
So to help, just to clarify, so Alex is a internet-based kind of math curriculum where it's individualized based on some assessments that students take, and then it sort of tracks their learning, right?
And it already has all of the core math standards in it.
Okay, so that is sort of how you know where your kids are at any given time in the area of math. And then knowing that you're 9, 12, and a lot of the students, it's multi-age, they're out. They're using HeadRush, which is another platform, and you have some power standards loaded in there.
Yes.
And then they're able to track what they've demonstrated that they know. How do you know that they know something? And is there credit given as they're out there, or what is that?
I would say we know they know something because they have to teach it some other way, or they have to, or it's organic. You know, we looked for that bird. We knew our numbers were off because one of the students has been really into getting all the numbers on a map, the GPS numbers on a map, and they were wrong. Some of them, our bearings were wrong. So we went back and retaught that. So I think it's a matter of they're demonstrating it more authentically. When they have to figure it out on paper, okay, these are the bearings and this is the direction we need to go, they're proving whether or not they can do those math skills, the mapping skills that they need out of the social studies standards. They do some presentation work, which is more traditional, I guess you could say. They write
a lot.
They write a lot. One's writing a letter that's going to be published in all the local newspapers as soon as we get the get-go from Senator Bewley, and he's worked hard on it. And this is a student who, he's a senior, but at 9th grade, I think he wrote about a paragraph, and it was pulling teeth to get that. And of course, he's got to go through more drafts, but I just think about the non-reluctance to do those things.
The willingness.
So I would say they're very authentic if they can be. We would much rather do that than there's no paper test anywhere about anything.
No.
Occasionally, like in science now, when we got all those cold days, Travis took a couple standards that are hard to get in project-based. You know, maybe you want to talk about that, how we pivoted on that too.
Yeah, we pivoted on that. And it's not just science that has these standards, but there are some standards that are kind of hard to get at when you're in the woods So what I did is I went and I found some course material that worked, and I assigned it to them. And what made it really interesting is a lot of these kids, you can't get them off of YouTube, but they didn't want to learn it that way. They actually had me pivot again and essentially teach them like in a standard classroom. But what I'm doing is, and I guess I would do this even if I was in a regular classroom, is I'm personalizing it. So, if we're working on something like forces in motion, instead of coming up with just a generic object, I'm drawing a picture of a truck and I'm saying, hey, Johnny, that's your truck. And by the way, that stick figure behind it, that's you. You ate your Wheaties this morning. This is how hard you're pushing against your truck. How fast is it accelerating? And they're just eating it up.
It always is good to mix in some sarcasm.
Oh, yes.
I'm really good at sarcasm and they know it. And so once in a while, they catch me on some sarcasm too. But
it sounds a lot like you know your students well. So relationships are kind of at the center here. And it appears at times, except maybe when they leave you to take some of their elective opportunities, you're running it a little bit like a one-room schoolhouse.
It is absolutely
right, and very interdisciplinary. Are you connected to the graduation requirements for the district?
Yes, we have the same graduation requirements. This school district has 26 credits, and of course spread out over the state cores and then all the electives. And so and this district has they call it a school district diploma, so that way there's not one for each school. It's a district diploma, which really works out well for Class Act kids. Then all of our stuff goes into the same GPA structured stuff. We have the Laude system here for honors. We have a couple of honor roll students or honor students this year that'll graduate with honors, scholarships, all of that. So the only thing that looks different about that transcript is it may say English 10.26 credit instead of 0.25 credit or something like that. Where in a traditional school, you're earning quarter credits up to a whole credit, where ours could be any combination of things. We do try to stay kind of in that ballpark of what we know is in the traditional, but sometimes we just don't, and it just doesn't work out that way. And I guess for English, we tend to group 9, 10, and 11, 12 in the sense of looking at the standards. We don't group the kids by that grade level. So for like that social studies thing we were talking about, it's 9 and 10, 11 and 12. All those standards are there. And we just look at them and see, and actually the 9th graders are probably doing a 12th grade standard. But when we assess it knowing that they're 9th graders and they've got more time to work on something. So they get the credit, they'll get a grade. We don't really like the grades.
No, we'd rather be purely standard based.
But we can't be yet because the district's not standard based. And there'd be no way to translate that so that they could participate in scholarships and honors program and things like that. So we don't go any lower than a C-. If a student does something that is not at least proficient at C range, which we call proficient, and maybe there's 1 or 2 things that are not proficient in that, we have them redo it, or we don't give them the credit for it yet. They go back to it again.
So we've done a little bit here of kind of comparing you to your traditional high school, but I'm just now curious. All this is just, it's amazing, right? What you're doing for your community and your learners. What measurement or what, like, I guess, skills or outcomes do you have specifically that's different than the traditional high school, that because they're going to Class Act, not is it, oh, well, you'll get a traditional diploma or a traditional transcript. What are some of these things that your kids are getting because they've chosen Class Act?
Well, I'd say right off the top of my head, I can think of collaboration. Our kids know how to work together. That still doesn't mean it's perfect.
No.
They're just like at the staff meeting, there's usually somebody that's got a complaint, but they know how to work together. And one of the other things we hear from the community is that our kids really work with the community well. I mean, there's not much of that goes on at the traditional school. I would say collaboration with themselves, with people in the community.
I would add the ability to learn.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they aren't dependent on you and I being the sage on the stage dispensing information. They learn how to go out and find that information themselves and how to recognize that, you know what I'm looking at right here may not be the best place to go to find that information.
Yeah. Or if they need to advocate for themselves. They don't usually sit there and wait for us. Well, they could sit there all day and wait for us to hand them a piece of paper, and it's not going to happen.
Nope, paper's not coming.
They learn to say, okay, I know this, I'm doing this, now I'm stuck. I mean, we hear them automatically either ask each other or ask one of us, hey, I don't get this. Can you come and explain this to me in another way? I don't remember that happening that much in my English classrooms when I was in the traditional school. Mostly they wanted to be fed whatever I had to feed them. And occasionally there was a kid who asked a question or wanted to know more. That's the other thing, that want to know more thing, where we connect their interests to something else that they want to know, and get a lot deeper. So we don't cover as much. It's just bigger, deeper, deeper stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like you're giving them just an opportunity to learn the important skills to be contributing citizens after they leave. I mean, they've learned how to connect with the community, right? They've learned how to figure things out if they don't know the answer. And that's awesome. I'm curious, if you're a charter school, a lot of our audience is interested in charters or part of charter schools. How has being a charter school in this whole process allowed you to do the great work that you're doing?
Flexibility, for sure. I mean, we could pack up right, at 8 o'clock and say, hey, you know what, we're leaving today because there's no power in the building, but we got power. We don't need power. We're going to go do whatever. That happened to us
a couple
of years ago. We just packed up and left.
Well, we're packing up next Friday.
Yeah. So I would say flexibility. I would say a lot of autonomy. Travis and I always keep our principal informed, but at the same time, he's not really looking over our shoulders to say, show me where this is on a piece of paper, because it's not really going to be on a piece of paper. I mean, we have lesson plans, we do, all different things like that, but they don't look anything like a traditional lesson plan.
I was to say that our lesson plans look nothing like traditional lesson plans.
Yeah. And it doesn't have traditional things that way. So flexibility, autonomy, classroom management looks different.
Very different.
It's a very noisy classroom, and we can't have certain people sub for us because they can't quite wrap their brain around it. And we get that, it's just people working in this busy thing, and they're not all sitting in desks in a row. They're at tables, or they're wandering around doing work on a treadmill that is a working treadmill, or they're just moving from desk to desk. And you really have to get used to a lot of movement and a fair amount of talking.
A fair amount.
And obviously they get corrected to not talk as much.
Yeah, if they're really just sitting there conversating and not getting anything done, then obviously we're going to correct that. But
so I really think the person who works in a charter school has to come in with this flexible mindset that I'm not going to start out that way as a teacher, because often project-based, charter school teachers were traditional teachers first, or at the very least were trained as traditional teachers. So they come into this world where it seems kind of chaotic. Well, it is chaotic because there's a lot of things going on at once. You've got 20 kids in here all working on an individual project. And
they're in a different spot.
Yeah.
Even our seminars.
That's something else that our kids tell us they really like, that's different from the traditional environment, is that they still have control over that pace of learning. So we do always have them in different places. We struggle as teachers with the deadlines. How do we hold them accountable to a deadline? We're still struggling with that. So now we're learning that, this student just works slower, but he turns the work in. This one is just goofing around, wasting time. And, he just needs to, we just need to get on him about that.
Hmm.
So they like that too, because they often say, I can't believe I'm finally learning math because I don't have to keep up with the kid next to me. I never got math. Well, he got math. He just needed to go at a different pace. And traditional teachers don't always have that privilege or opportunity with what they have to teach.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really able to personalize the education, and being a charter is allowing you to be more nimble and to pivot when it's needed to, and not necessarily need to be at the same pace or at the same timing as everybody else in the building. And so, yeah, what a great note to make about how a charter school would be able to do that, since the whole staff is right here in this call, right? There's two of you, and you're able to truly kind of ebb and flow according to the needs of your kids, but then still tracking, still getting that transcript, still making sure that they're meeting, the requirements and the standards that they would at any other school. Is there anything else before we wrap this up today that you are excited about that you'd want to share with our audience?
Well, I did want to make sure people knew that special education services or any of those particular services are still offered in a charter school. We're obligated to do them by law, of course. So that is another reason we decided to stay on campus a couple hours a day, because last year special ed services came out to us, but it's very hard to do that because their caseloads are tough, and we're not 5 minutes from this campus. We're more like 15 to 20.
Okay.
So it was much better if we stayed here. We made sure the kids got what they needed, and then we could move on. So I did want to make sure we pointed that out.
I actually completely forgot that the beginning of last year they were coming to us.
Yeah. I would say another thing we're really excited about is we're finally getting some improvements at our Tracy Lake.
Yes.
It sounds like it's getting a new roof. It sounds like we're getting actual pit toilets.
Instead of glorified outhouses.
What a fun thing to be excited about, right?
Well, you're going to get soft with all these amazing amenities now that you have out there.
They're talking about maybe a propane generator so that
Oh, and
So
another thing really good for people would be the other thing that creates our flexibility, which we didn't have before this new and improved Class Act, is we did not have a bus and a designated bus driver. And when the kids actually built that project to get the bus, which is a retired district school bus, but then Travis got a CDL. And that's another key piece to it, because if we wanted to pick up and go, we couldn't do that. Well, under today's world would be impossible because of the lack of bus drivers.
Well, and we couldn't have even pivoted last year.
Yeah. So that's been huge. And I think if people are creating and designing, they should consider that right away and not waste time on that one bit, because it definitely will improve their ability to take off and do whatever they want to do when it comes up.
Yeah. So how can people connect with you? I mean, it sounds like you have lesson plans and project ideas and even student management kind of ideas in terms of how you can bring kids outside, or how they could come maybe visit, like you were saying. Some people just need to see it in action. How can people find you?
Well, they can find us online at our school district's website.
Yes, it's csdk12.net, and then when you go to schools, Class Act is listed.
Mm-hmm. We're on Facebook via the schools,
the district's webpage.
District webpage. So just search Schwamigan, and you'll find that.
You can email us classact@csdk12.net.
Mm-hmm. We do have some videos on YouTube also. So I think those are under Class Act, right? Remember the videos?
Yes, they're all linked on our
on
our Class Act page.
So it's probably better if you go to the
I can't remember the channel name off the top of my head.
And call us. I know sometimes people are kind of afraid to come visit because they're thinking, what are people going to think? Come visit us, because there's just no better way to see what we do than to spend a day with us and let the kids teach you what they do. And that was the best advice I ever got when I came into the charter world. I went and visited 2 or 3 great schools who are still some of them my best friends in the world. So just call us.
Yeah.
But we'll
call
put
us.
some of those resources and links at the bottom of the video. And so I appreciate your time and everything that you're doing for your community and your learners. It's super exciting. Every time I get a chance to talk with you all, it's inspiring to know that you're inspiring kids. So I greatly appreciate you. I hope we can do this again and connect again. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.